Hi, and welcome everyone to the second in a series of dialogues with the Science and Society section. Um, sorry, I need to say yes to the message on Zoom. My name is Gifford Wong, and I'm one of the co-chairs for the science policy section. We'll give folks maybe a couple of minutes in case they are a minute or two slow. But I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining our event today. I will probably, well, actually, there are a number of you joining. Oh, and I've just been spotlighted. This is great. What a time to share my screen. So again, really appreciate everyone joining this second dialogue on science policy as part of an effort to introduce members and non-members of AGU Science and Society section to this section. I have a couple of introductory slides. And then, of course, we have three panelists that will speak to particular areas within science policy that you saw the title of. But essentially, the title of this dialogue, playfully, is Playing at the Intersection of Science and Policy, parenthetically, without getting run over. And so without further ado, let me introduce folks who are joining the call to this track within the Science and Society section, Science Policy. There are a couple of goals for the section, just to serve as a very broad overview of the section, to try and catalyze discovery and solutions to scientific and societal challenges. A second goal is to promote and exemplify an inclusive scientific culture. And a third goal is to partner broadly with other organizations and sectors to effectively address scientific and societal challenges. And so this section is fairly new. It's been serves as a place within AGU for those whose scholarship includes science policy, but also community science and citizen science and science communication and social and behavioral sciences and art and science. It's a great way that sort of provides interdisciplinary bridges between all of the various areas of focus within AGU. Our intention is to create a welcoming community, both for decision makers and practitioners, to help maintain that strong connection and partnership with the earth and space sciences. And perhaps I'll pause because I realize that we are sort of just jumping straight in. So the folks that were able to join right on the hour, you sort of know that I'm providing a very brief introduction, but folks who are just joining in now, fear not, there are three panelists that will be able to speak to their experiences within science policy. And what we're doing right now is just providing a quick overview of the section and sort of hitting upon a little bit of the intent of the dialogue series. We'll also have an opportunity to hear from a representative from the policy section at AGU to hear about some specific aims of theirs before we turn then back to our panelists and hear about some of the work that they're doing, but also some of what paths they took to get to where they are right now. So apologies for that. So returning back to the sort of section overview, another intention for the Science and Society section is to try and elevate the geosciences and the awareness of geosciences within more diverse communities. So those, especially those that were historically underserved or underrepresented in science, provide some learning opportunities about how earth and space sciences can inform policymaking, build very meaningful cross-disciplinary collaborations. And just as with any sort of facet of AGU and the sciences therein. We're all about sharing information among among the members. There are a number of tracks within this section, science policy being one, but others include art and science, community and citizen science, science communication, and social and behavioral science. Each of those tracks are trying to sort of introduce themselves also with sort of like a moderated panel dialogue. And so obviously you're attending the one for science policy. For those who caught the art and science dialogue last month, that's great, but it's also recorded. And then there are a couple of ways to find out more about some of the other tracks, including perhaps how to see the recording of the previous dialogue. And the next slide will show when the future dialogues will occur. I'll hang on this slide for just a quick second for folks who want to catch the QR code. But also if you just looked up the Science and Society section within AGU, you'll find the website that one of our members, Chris, has developed and curated, and it's quite informative, including some announcements, as well as areas where you can connect further with members of the section, how to potentially volunteer, and maybe more excitingly, how to share your story. Obviously, we want to try and shine a light on especially students or the career members who are working at the interface of science and society. So as promised, here are some of the upcoming dialogues, today being August 16th, so it's the science policy dialogue. There's one on community and citizen science in September, science communication in October, and social and behavioral sciences in November. Right now, I will now stop sharing and ask if Liz from AGU can speak up and share about some of the opportunities at AGU.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the intro, GIF. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Landau. I'm the Director of Science Policy and Government Relations at AGU. And GIF asked me to share just some of the opportunities that we can provide and some of our priorities that we have as an organization in terms of science policy. And first off, we really work for two main goals, one of which is to elevate the Earth and Space Sciences and scientists to policymakers. And the other is to help our scientists in our community to engage effectively in policymaking. So I have a few things that I hope will be helpful to everyone, just a high-level overview. Really, to start out, if people aren't sure if they want to be part of the science policy intersection, as Gift said, is it something where you feel safe running around this intersection, or are you worried about getting run over? Really, we find that scientists have such an incredibly rewarding experience when they work in science policy, and they are truly able to help make a difference. I think that is one of the most important things, and we have seen this time and time again. So if you're uncertain, if you have questions, hopefully the discussion today will help make you feel like there is a place for you in the science policy world, or give you more ideas for how to be engaged at the next level if you're already doing work there. And I look forward to sharing some opportunities with you. So I'm starting out with a few kind of quick and easy ways to be involved. AGU has a social media account specifically for science policy, and that's AGU Sci Policy. So please feel free to follow us. It's a great way to get news and opportunities as things come up if you are on Twitter. We also have a number of online engagements that take just a couple of minutes, things where you can write your legislators, and we have already set up the email for you. So all you have to do is add those specific details that really make your information compelling and personal, or you can easily phone call your legislators just by hitting one button instead of having to look up the information, and we'll provide you with talking points, just things to make it very, very easy for you to fit this into your busy schedule. You can also sign up to receive monthly science policy alerts, where we'll give you a few highlights of the things that have been happening over the past month. And I'll put all of these links in the chat after I'm done speaking, so you'll get a chance to copy those. If you want to do something a little more focused, if you have a little more time or just feeling really passionate about this, we do have both virtual and in-person opportunities to meet with policymakers. And we can provide more information about those. For example, we have an event coming up in September where we do have scientists coming to Washington, D.C. to meet with legislators and talk about key science policy issues. And elections are always a great opportunity to get involved in science policy. Even though we don't have a presidential election this year, midterm elections are incredibly important, and it's great to get involved. We have a whole website with a lot of opportunities and information about how to be involved in elections as a scientist at sciencevotesthefuture.org, so you can check that out. And also AGU has staff who can help you with writing op-eds, letters to the editor. Those can be a great way to influence policymakers by including them or some kind of reference to legislation in that work that you do. And then for those who are interested in going all in, or maybe have been working at the science policy interface for quite a while and really want to try something next level, there are some more long-term opportunities around the elections, as well as potentially running for office yourself. Certainly some AG scientists have done it and have been elected, which is really exciting to see. We also have a lot of options for opportunities that may take either a year or a few months, something that might be part-time or full-time. So we have our Congressional Science Fellowship, which is an amazing opportunity and something that I know some of our panelists or moderators have done in the past. We have AGU Science Policy Internships. If you're interested in working at the science policy interface for a few months to see if it's something you'd be interested in or to get to know and network with the community. We have a lot of really interesting engagement programs that I'll talk about in a second. And as I said, all of these are listed on our website, and I'll share those links shortly. So a few of the great engagement programs we have include Voices for Science, which is a year-long program where we help you achieve your science policy goals, whatever those might look like. There's also a local science partners program, and this is really built around developing a relationship with a key legislator. So if you're looking to build that kind of relationship with a policymaker, that would be a great opportunity for you. We also have a team-based organizing opportunity that we are doing jointly with Union of Concerned Scientists. And so if you want to rally a group of people on your campus or in your home state or city, that could be a great opportunity for you to be able to do that. All of these programs have a ton of built-in support and resources for you. So we make it as easy as we possibly can for you to be able to take action in this way. And then if you want to sign up for action alerts from AGU, something you can do right now is just text AGU to the number 52886. And then it'll provide you with a link where you can go ahead and enter just some basic information for us. And then we'll send you alerts whenever there is, say, an important science bill moving forward in Congress, and we need scientists to take action and contact their legislators. So please do that if you're interested. And I'm going to leave you with a little contact information here before I say farewell and hand it over to GIF and to our fantastic panelists today. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much to GIF and Julie and all of our panelists. I really appreciate that all of you are taking the time to share this really important information, and I'll drop some links in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Liz. Really appreciate you sharing some of the science policy opportunities that exist at AGU, as well as sharing some of those links in the chat. Speaking of the chat, for folks participating on the call, as questions arise, please feel free to enter those questions in the chat. And when we get to the sort of Q&A section, we'll try and get to as many as we can, perhaps combining some. And of course, the ubiquitous lightning round maybe towards the very end to try and squeeze in as many as we can. Quick introduction of myself. So my name is Gif, or I go by Gif. My name is Gifford Wong, and I'm a research staff member here at the Science and Technology Policy Institute. I'm one of the co-chairs to the science policy track, along with Karen Akerlof at George Mason University. And we thought we would provide our contribution to the Science and Society dialogues with a panel discussion titled, How Do You Play at the Intersection of Science and Policy Without Getting Run Over? And as you well may guess, there's not just one way to answer that. And that's why we brought three people to sort of share their experiences in federal science policy and sort of playing in that intersection. Great. First, we'll start with, or I'll share their names, and then they'll have an opportunity to briefly introduce themselves. We have Aaron Goldner, staff member, Senate Appropriations Committee. We have Adina Liebman, senior advisor in the Office of the Undersecretary at NOAA, and Dave Reedmiller, director of the Climate Center at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. And again, our hope for this is, in addition to learning about their careers in science policy and perhaps how they navigated some of those transitions to and from between science policy and academic research or academia, we'll also have an opportunity to ask them a little bit about their perspectives on some current events. For example, perhaps important next steps on climate, given some of the recent events over the past, just this past month. So maybe with that, I'll start with Aaron and maybe provide a brief introduction of yourself to the folks on the call.
Great to be here. I'm Aaron Goldner, currently a professional staff member for the Majority Senate Appropriations Committee. I'll keep my background short, as a lot of it is in the bio documents attached to the invitation for the meeting, but it's great to be back at an AGU event, because that's kind of where I got my start in science policy. I'm an earth scientist, got my undergrad degrees at Oregon State and graduate degrees at Purdue University. I studied both ice cores, basically reconstructing atmospheric gases from basically trapped within the bubbles of ice cores, and then also did a lot of work as a computational climate modeler, basically studying what is known as the non-carbon dioxide forcings for a kind of warming planet in both paleo and future climate simulations. At the end of my PhD time period, I became very interested in how to take actionable steps to address climate change. This was around 2012 when I was finishing up my work at Purdue University, and I was able to stumble upon the American Meteorological Society Summer Policy Colloquium. It's a kind of a 2-week crash course that a lot of folks actually that I know out in DC did before they did a congressional fellowship that Liz was talking about through the science societies. But that basically gave me my kind of angle into thinking about how, as a scientist, you could apply to do things outside the lab related to science policy. So I applied for the American Geophysical Union Congressional Science Fellowship, and that was my sponsoring society for basically my first year in Washington, DC, which was 2013. I followed up a couple other fellowships at the Department of Energy, also through what is known as the AAAS program, and then became a full-time staffer in 2015 in the Office of Senator Whitehouse, covering kind of energy and transportation policy. Adina Liebman was actually my colleague at the time, so we've actually worked together for many years on and off the Hill. And then just recently, in 2021, I joined the Senate Appropriations Committee, and I cover basically the larger applied DOE program accounts, the Office of Science, ARPA-E, Clean Demonstrations Office, and then also cover the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So kind of the applied energy agencies in the appropriations process. So I will stop there and kick it off to my colleagues.
Thanks for that, Aaron. Well, I suppose it's fitting. Adina, do you mind introducing yourself next?
Sure, thank you, Gif. I'm a bit of an anomaly in the panel. I jumped the scientist ship after my master's. Everyone else is a PhD, but I thought I had a pretty cool resume until I met folks like Gif and Aaron, and Dave, meeting him today. But I did my master's in population genetics of Loggerhead sea turtles. So a species very much impacted by climate change and endangered as well. And similar to Aaron, kind of left the lab with the question of, so what? How is this helping my neighbor? What am I doing with this work? Selfishly was very interested in it, but I was missing the kind of bigger impact factor. I was a graduate assistant for the South Carolina Sea Grant Consortium, and that's turned me on to the NOAA Sea Grant Canals Marine Policy Fellowship. Doesn't really roll off the tongue, but it is a one-year policy fellowship in DC. It's a little bit broader than the AAAS, as it allows for JDs and masters and other graduate degrees outside of PhD to come to DC for a year, either working in the executive branch, being housed in one of the federal agencies, or working on the Hill. I was fortunate to be a legislative fellow and landed in Senator Whitehouse's office in 2009 to 2010, which was kind of amidst the last really big climate legislative push that was happening. I initially thought I was going to go back and use that year as a sabbatical and go back for a PhD, but I ended up falling in love more with the law side of the house and ended up going back for my JD. And then have hopped around at different nonprofits before coming back to the Hill as a full-time staffer, as Aaron mentioned, working on the ocean, coastal, water, wildlife portfolio in the office. I went back to a nonprofit and then joined as a member of the Biden-Harris administration as a political appointee over here at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration under the Department of Commerce, working in the NOAA Administrator's Office as a senior advisor. I started here in February. My portfolio includes working on offshore wind, which is one of the key tenets of the president's climate plan, and a big push over here at NOAA, as well as other federal agencies. And then also working with our line office, the Office of Marine Aviation Operations, which manages all of the NOAA's vessels, ships, and planes, as well as the NOAA Commission Court, one of the uniform services of the US government. So happy to answer questions today. And thank you so much, Gif, for allowing me to join the panel.
Oh, no, definitely the pleasure is all mine. And full disclosure for folks who are watching this, I learned basically everything I know. Probably forgot a lot of the lessons from Aaron and Adina because I got to work under both of them when I served as a Congressional Science Fellow myself in the Senator's office back in the day. So with that disclosure of myself and my connection to Aaron and Adina, I'm also happy to have Dave introduce himself.
Great, thanks, Gif, and appreciate everyone for the invitation and taking some time out of your day to listen to us, and excited to hear what you all have to say as well. So my career path is a little bit like Aaron's in the sense that I went to grad school in the Northwest, went to University of Washington, was an atmospheric chemist there, had a pretty rough time kind of acclimating from a liberal arts undergrad into a very math physics heavy program there, but ended up working with Professor Dan Jaffe, who ran an observatory on top of Mount Bachelor. Anybody who's a skier might know the mountain. It's a great 9,000-foot mountain in the middle of the Cascades with Bend, Oregon, right at the base, with Deschutes Brewery there. And the great part about that, on top of the good beer, was that we got to measure air pollutants, and with the objective of really trying to characterize and quantify the influence of Asian air pollution on air quality in the Western US. And through that work, I was studying NOx, so NO and NO2 as precursors to ground level ozone. And so there was very obvious societal implications and policy aspects of that work. And so the deeper I got into that, the more interested I got into the policy related aspects. And I was fortunate that Dan, as an advisor, certainly encouraged me to pursue that. And so dabbled around in coursework across the university. Like Aaron, did the American Meteorological Society Summer Policy Colloquium, and that really just kind of reinforced my interest in the policy space. and ultimately led me to kind of pursuing the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship in DC after graduating. And I started in on the legislative side. I worked for Mark Udall, who at this time was a senator from Colorado, sitting on the Energy Committee. So really had an interesting time because this was 2010, 2011. So as Adina mentioned, this is in the wake of Waxman-Markey legislation, but a pretty monumental year for energy issues when you consider Deepwater Horizon and the Fukushima disaster. So a lot of interesting issues to work on. But after that year, I kind of wanted to focus more narrowly on climate policy. And after working on the domestic side of the house, went over to the State Department, where I joined the climate office there and led US engagement in the IPCC, and ultimately served as a negotiator on the Paris Agreement, while also kind of engaging in the interagency climate research process through the US Global Change Research Program, which then allowed me to get recruited into the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy to lead the 4th National Climate Assessment. And this was just before the 2016 election. So certainly was entering an environment that I thought was going to be very different than it turned out to be in terms of how climate change played out as a priority for the administration. After completing the NCA 4, went back from my detail, which at that point was with the U.S. Geological Survey, where I served as a federal program manager for the Northeast and Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Centers, which really worked. It was a really unique kind of cooperative agreement between the federal government and a consortium of universities to advance the adaptation of fish, wildlife, and habitat. But after a decade of a variety of science policy careers, kind of at the federal level and UN international level, wanted to focus more locally and was looking for cooler summers. And so had the opportunity to move to coastal Maine here at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, which is a roughly 75-person nonprofit. Our mission is to develop and deliver collaborative solutions to global ocean challenges. And so they were launching a climate center and basically gave me the keys and said, do good work. And it was a pretty big shift from federal life to nonprofit life in a variety of ways we'd be happy to talk about. But the one of the most rewarding aspects of it is that I've been able to sort of implement what I had always hoped to achieve within the federal government by really designing a center that is delivering climate services to coastal and marine stakeholders. And so really thinking about the climate science, the engagement, and the solution development that's needed to make sure that waterfront economies throughout the Gulf of Maine can continue to thrive in a warmer world. So with that, I'll turn it back to Gif, and thank you all again.
Oh, wow. Well, thanks, Dave. That is really cool that you had an opportunity to basically, like you said, be handed the keys to a shiny new center. That's really amazing. And maybe I'll take a quick moment to again encourage folks that are listening in to feel free to add to the list of questions. But I have a couple of questions. I have one softball question that I feel like a lot of you sort of hit upon, right? Like, some of the easy questions are, how did you get into science policy and what you like most about your career in science policy? And I feel like in your introductions, it was just sort of natural that you touched on at least how you got into science policy, whether it was wanting to be better at helping your neighbor, as Adina may have mentioned, and so did you, Dave, or something more specific, like the American Meteorological Society's Summer Policy Colloquium that Aaron and Dave, and actually full disclosure, so did I, like that's how I sort of really got the bug, I think, to sort of see science policy as a direction. Dave, you hit upon this a little bit in your answer, but maybe I could just sort of dig at it more with all three of you and sort of say, like, in the moment now, what is it that you like most about your career in science policy? Like, what helps you get out of bed in the morning? and then we'll turn into maybe some more specific questions later. But maybe I'll start with Dave. I know you touched upon it in your answer. I don't know if you have a little more to elaborate, but I'd love to also hear from Aaron and Adina about what it is that you respectively like most about your careers.
Yeah, I can give a quick start. I mean, I think there was both a push and a pull for me. The push was kind of out of academia, in part because I just had the realization as I went through grad school that, you know, maybe I wasn't the best researcher, and that was really hard to grapple with for a little while, but also realized that that's okay, that there are other opportunities for PhD scientists out there. And you know, the pull was just that it, you know, from the start and probably grounded, you know, in sort of the liberal arts undergrad education, was just the kind of societal relevance of the research that we were doing. And, you know, so now, you know, when I was working in the federal government, you know, you're kind of living the news, and especially if you work on the Hill. And so it's a really invigorating and exciting experience, but at the same time, particularly after working at the State Department and in other roles, you know, a lot of the accomplishments, while highly visible, can also feel somewhat intangible. And so having the opportunity to kind of now apply a lot of that sort of knowledge and experience at a local level to, you know, literally walk a working waterfront anywhere in the coast of Maine and say, you know, we help them sort of, you know, with their resilience plan, or things of that sort. It's been really rewarding to have that much more tangible and very personal approach to it. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Dave. Maybe I'll also just throw a quick reminder for folks that are joining the call to remember to mute yourselves. And then maybe I'll turn the question or continue the question to sort of see to Adina, like what do you like most about your career in science policy? Probably building on what you may have shared earlier, but just to hear it more formally.
Sure. I mean, one of the things I've liked about operating in the policy world is that there are so many people coming with so many different backgrounds and perspectives, and to me that's what really makes for the strongest policy. Having scientists in the room, having lawyers in the room, having, you know, grassroots advocates in the room, that's where the strongest policy comes from, is being able to reflect all those different perspectives to where you're heading forward. I think having the science background has been personally very beneficial. It really helps ground things in the facts and the numbers and make for the most defensible cases for whatever you may be pushing for or arguing for. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in policy also to like take that kind of creativity, take these different backgrounds and really lay down to like what's the realm of the possible and where the opportunities are. It involves a lot of strategizing, and not every day you get to leave with a win. So it also takes creativity and finding opportunities to stay motivated and enthusiastic sometimes. But when you do get those wins and you do see that progress and you do see the impact on the work that you've done, I think that will forever be kind of the most rewarding work that I've been able to do. We actually see those outcomes pay off at the end of a hard train of hard work with a good team.
Oh, that's awesome. And I imagine too, like your comment about like not every day allows you to leave with the win, maybe like building some of that self-care, self-reliant, like resilience that may sometimes be required. Aaron, do you have anything to sort of share as far as like what you like most about what you're doing? Because since you became a staffer on the Hill, you've managed to also stay on the Hill.
No, I think I feel really lucky, honestly, because I, you know, a while ago decided that I came to DC because I wanted to work on climate change. And I think that can come in many forms. But since I've been in Washington, DC, I've been able to see a pretty, what I would call crazy arc from no one even talking about the climate issue and snowballs flying on the Senate floor to, you know, in the past couple of years, like actual significant progress. Like we have, you know, a long ways still to go. And I think like we all realize, and a lot of us who are working in this field to help address climate change, like we're going to have careers for, you know, the rest of our lives figuring this out, but like to actually be here to see significant progress come from where it started, I think has been, it's been encouraging to see.
Thanks for that. And also thanks for sharing that you were around for that infamous snowball. So there's been a lot of great questions in the chat box. And so now that we've asked for questions, please keep them coming. I will try and pick, not at random, and we may not get to all of them, but one that actually struck me as possibly something that one or all of you could perhaps you may want to answer is from Kripa. So the three of you have walked similar but different paths. And so in your opinion, what are some key skills and traits that current scientists, you might sort of encourage them to learn so that they're more effective at the science policy interface? And maybe vice versa, you know, what skills and traits do you wish policy folks could build on to better engage with, say, you in any of the roles that you may have played? I don't know. In a way, this is to all three of you. So you can pick who goes first. I suppose I should pick, sorry, Aaron.
I'll jump in. So climate communications is a lot of fun. I think it's not, you know, not everybody wants to be a climate communicator, but I think the one thing that I've really enjoyed in the transition of figuring out how to take complex scientific figures and facts and distilling them for policymakers is kind of this trait. It's figuring out how to take something that you know, as scientists, we're trained to write a certain way in our papers, and we're trained to talk about our results in front of our posters at conferences and X, Y, and Z. But I think really figuring out how to explain what you do to everyday people is a really important trait, whether or not you want to go into science policy or not. It really allows you to not only learn what you're doing and what you're learning, but figuring out new ways to think about how to distill that information like is not easy. And I think it takes a lot of practice, and there's a lot of ways to, as Liz kind of outlined before, like ways to do it, but I think it's a really valuable trait to try to figure out how to do. And that's basically taking really complex things that scientists do and try to distill them into pieces of information that maybe a policymaker or your dad at the dinner table can understand.
Thanks, Aaron. I don't know, Dave or Adina, do either of you want to add to the possible list of traits that, you know, either scientists can work on while they're still sciencing, or maybe reflect on what you wish more policymakers maybe had a better grasp of in dealing with them in your science policy interactions?
This is a put an exclamation point on the communicator role. A lot of policy really is communications, in that distillation of policymakers, but also to your broader audience too. Like part of the policymaking role is communicating outward as well. You know, in a role at a federal agency, I am beholden to the taxpayer. The American public is our client, our customers. So making sure we're delivering on the needs of the American people. So communicating outwards, especially in the current world we live in, you very rarely get more attention than a 30-second TikTok video or 140 character tweet to convey what could be a very complicated message at times. So communicating different levels, different themes effectively, and with confidence is a very key skill in the policy world. As far as like reflecting on what scientists uniquely bring to a lot of these conversations is that certain areas of policy, climate change included, those conversations get very heated and very personal. I think coming from a science background trains you to try and stay in the objective, try to follow the facts, and that can be some of the strongest arguments as you push policy forward. Translating into communication at the end also, but there's definitely skills that a science background particularly trains you in that makes you a particularly key player in developing and advocating and advancing policy as well.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add to that, on the communication front, I think one of the most challenging things that I've dealt with is, as a scientist, you always want to kind of insert every caveat to your knowledge to make sure that that you're sort of fully characterizing the issue. But in a lot of instances, I've been asked to you got to distill it down. You have to be willing to sort of strip out some of those uncertainties that may not you think are really important, but ultimately at the end of the day aren't going to change the decision one way or another. So really kind of understanding which caveats are important to carry forward is a key communication piece. The two other things I would just say are, in terms of skills to build as a scientist, one is your fluency in tangential areas. And I can't emphasize that enough, just like building up a literacy, if you want to focus on, say, climate change, like also become fluent in, the electrical grid and land conservation and other related areas that will allow you to sort of enter into, or at least hold conversations and understand things from other perspectives. And then the related piece and final point that I'll make is that, and I think Adina started to hit on this, is that just listen. Like, I think oftentimes, as scientists, we're so excited to sort of share what we know. But, one thing you learn very quickly in the science policy space, of course, is that science is, one contributor to any policy making decision framework. And so you really need to not just wait for your chance to talk, but just go in with open ears and be ready to listen.
I like that. I like that last one. Thanks, Dave, about listening. I have maybe two more questions before we try and make a turn towards the second, or not second half, but the other aspect of this dialogue that we sort of promised was maybe like a discussion of current events and looking towards the future. So there are two questions here that are kind of related. I'm going to mispronounce the names, so I apologize. But I think Yedzi and Lexi sort of asked similar questions. And it kind of gets to the second point you brought up, Dave, about like the tangential or adjacent topics, and like knowing where your science and how it sort of touches on others. Yedzi sort of talked about how, for people who are still engaged in the sciences, still perhaps pursuing that graduate degree, is there maybe an anecdote or story you can share from your experience? But basically the question is, how do you locate your policy issues of interest? Or maybe like, how do you maybe find what it is that you want to advocate for? And I feel like that's kind of related to a little bit to what Lexi asked about, when you engage with people on panels like this, or when you go to science society meetings, and there are folks who are say like, I want to still stay in the sciences, how might you point to how their science still can inform policy? Okay, maybe they're not quite as closely related as I thought, but if any of you have thoughts as to thinking back to when you were still in school and sort of like, how did you come upon maybe that initial policy issue that really sparked, or combined with say the AMS experience for Aaron and Dave's case, really sort of motivated you to come to DC?
I can start this round. So maybe I'm an anomaly, but I was one of those like weird kids since I was like 2 and had any sort of independent thought, was like obsessed with sharks and the ocean. And as soon as I knew the phrase marine biologist, decided that's what I was going to be. So I'd always been on a path to work in the ocean space. The realities of like being a scientist, when they finally hit, where I started guiding more towards the policy of like applying that passion in a different way. But I think a big thing is finding something that carries you through every day on the tough days and on the good days. something that you're still motivated to work on, and you are motivated enough to bring other people into the fold. You don't feel guilty trying to recruit more to your cause and passion because you feel like it's important and it has value and you have enthusiasm to share aplenty. So I think it's kind of like following your natural path. So from that, like, small obsession starting very young on, sharks specifically, that now has grown beyond that. I obviously don't work on sharks directly anymore. I work on, renewable energy in our oceans, and, going back to that kind of tangential interest and knowledge base, one thing tends to feed into something else that feeds into something else. And it's hard to know exactly where opportunities will lie from a career trajectory. So having an openness and willingness to test these different grounds and see if you have a passion that translates or skill set that translates, and exploring those options helps a lot. I think for my career, just helped me kind of dabble and find different areas that I didn't initially think I would be interested in, but maybe. And it also just helps you kind of pick up a broader network and more opportunities and, additional audiences for the policy that maybe your policy area or science area that maybe your initial passion, finding those translatable ideas or passions across different interest groups and building this broader network that's working on the same issues, maybe in different ways. So there's a lot of opportunities that come from just being open-minded, but still keeping some sort of vein at the middle of it that keeps you excited every day.
Oh, thanks for that, Dina. I don't know if either Dave or Aaron, you want to add to maybe how you chanced upon the policy issue that helped motivate you to move to DC, as a way of answering the question that was posed about, like, how does one, when they're still heavily sciencing, like still in academia, sort of like discover that connection to something that's societally relevant?
Yeah, I'll say, it started for me in grad school at University of Washington. I towards the end of grad school, I just started dabbling in coursework across the campus, in the School of Public Policy, School of Public Health, Civil and Environmental Engineering, and just taking coursework again in these related fields that, just to see what kind of sparked my interest. And a lot of the public health stuff obviously was of interest to me, just given my dissertation research. And so, when the climate health nexus and the air quality climate health nexus started to emerge, I felt, as though I was fairly well positioned to contribute to that space. So again, I think it is just kind of exposing yourself to different disciplines and not being afraid, and auditing courses if you don't want to really fully commit to being assessed, but still building some capacity in that space.
I really agree with what everyone is saying. I think it's the way to do it. It's all about, I think, baby steps. I think I was kind of rereading this question about basic research versus applied, and how do you kind of like make that shift. And I think it's something that just doesn't just happen overnight. You're not just going to march to DC and start working on policy. I think, these themes of finding areas of interest, I think Dave's got a really good point about thinking more broadly. And again, it's hard when you're a PhD candidate or someone in the final parts of their PhD to have time to do anything. So I think part of it's just carving out whatever you can and finding those areas that you want to talk more about. And I think what I started doing was very similar to how you would pick a grad school or an undergraduate school. Like, you talk to professors and you talk about schools, you talk about options, you talk about research. Like, you can do the same thing when it comes to policy with a coffee or reaching out to people. I think they're more than happy to start talking to you about these broader implications of a lot of this work. So again, I think baby steps is key, and doing what you're comfortable with. But also, I think, to what my colleagues were saying, like staying true to like what interests and passions you have will kind of help you build into probably things that you didn't think that you were even interested in the first place on.
Just to add on that, one thought is that to also appreciate the experiences that teach you what you don't want to work on or what you don't have a passion for. Sometimes, at least in my career path, those were the most effective at helping me find course corrections in my career or interests of the validating of, for example, during law school, I clerked at the Department of Justice in their environmental enforcement section, which is civil litigation. I had suspicion I didn't want to be a real lawyer and litigator. That summer definitely confirmed I do not have it in me to be a real litigator. So some of those experiences, which may not land at the end with what you thought could be a dream job or things, still gives you a lot of benefit of getting to know yourself better too. So both the experiences that reaffirm a passion or reaffirm a lack of passion can have equal weight as you move through life.
That's definitely a strong point. And maybe echoes of what Dave mentioned as far as like listening. Clearly that's an example of listening to yourself say, no, this is not what it is that I want to do. So thanks for sharing that final point.
No slight to my colleagues at Department of Justice. Love them. Some of the most brilliant people I've ever met. It just confirmed not my career path. Theirs, not mine.
Right. Yeah. Yours. All I statements, right? That my career path. Well, so I know the context for this dialogue was also meant to kind of like look towards the future. And so I'll sort of preface this by saying, panelists, I did have a question to sort of ask of you three, what makes you optimistic about moving forward with climate policy, perhaps in light of current events or current needs. And I'll point to two jumping off points. And I'll go in order of the, how you introduce yourselves, because I can't believe it. We're almost out of time. But when looking towards the future, there was a question in the chat actually addressed to Dave, another David, had sort of asked specifically, like, what are some sea level rise science needs that you see as being necessary to inform coastal adaptation efforts? And then a couple of folks on the chat as a second jumping off point have pointed to the sort of thing in the news cycle with respect to the climate effects of the Inflation Reduction Act. But again, my broad jumping off point is what makes you optimistic moving forward with climate policy. And then those two questions in the chat, if you want to be more specific with how you begin your answer. But maybe I'll start with Aaron, and then I'll go to Adina, and then we'll sort of wrap with Dave in our last minutes.
That's a good one. I thought a lot about it too. I think, we need to make progress where we can. And I think like the fact that we've been able to make the amount of progress that we have in the current political environment is something that we need to celebrate. But at the same time, the issue of global climate change is so big that, and we've waited so many decades to address it, like no one bill is going to be any sort of, end all be all. So I think like we need to, celebrate and be able to effectively implement policies under both IRA and also IIJA. There's, a lot of clean energy funding in both of these big packages that buy us more time to continue to kind of figure out how to confront these bigger challenges. But I think it should be a moment of optimism in an otherwise difficult time as it relates to kind of the constant news cycle of fires and floods and everything else we see every day at this point. So we should be excited about it. Hopefully the construct of funding gets even more people involved and it bends the curves of economics even further as it relates to clean energy technologies. And we can hopefully have different conversations as we move forward from the movement that hopefully these two bills bring forth.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I like that idea of celebrating the wins and watching inertia build, momentum build. Adina, what makes you optimistic about looking forward with respect to climate policy?
Sure. So, I'm fortunate to sit here at NOAA, the attest to, where we work on, all parts of the climate issue. We're, the authoritative source of oceanic, atmospheric, and climate data science and services for the federal government. So, we have teams and line offices who work on everything from just understanding what does climate change look like, what are the effects and impacts, to being extension officers in communities, helping them actually adapt, building resilience along our coasts, to also working on mitigation too, especially in my portfolio with offshore wind and a focus on clean energy and zero emissions technologies to help us on the mitigation side. So our one agency has kind of pieces of all parts of the puzzle, so to speak. And I think among the things that make me optimistic is that we have aggressive and ambitious, but still very much achievable goals set out by the president that we are working on under his administration. And that the people I work with too are just some of the most passionate and dedicated civil servants out there, who are committed to the mission, committed to working for our constituents, the American people, and pushing science-based policy decisions, getting things right from the start, and building industries like the offshore wind industry in the US with a solid foundation so it can carry on well beyond my term in this seat and others as well. So there's a lot of optimism of getting us on the right path and moving quickly as best we can with that, especially at NOAA as a science agency, with that hard science foundation, which personally, obviously, I'm very partial to as well. But using science to really drive innovation, drive a blue economy, drive coastal community resilience, all those things I mentioned, doing it all kind of at the same time. It's very exciting to be a part of.
Thanks. No, that is both exciting and, as you pointed out, that certainly lends to being optimistic. Dave, sorry to leave you just a couple minutes, but do you have anything to share with regards to what makes you optimistic about moving forward with policy, or to maybe address the sea level rise issue in particular?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say on the sea level rise note, I actually private messaged David because I wasn't sure if we were going to get to it, but happy to address those issues. If others want to talk about sea level rise, feel free to reach out to me. As far as what makes me optimistic, I'd kind of characterize them into sort of three buckets. I think first and foremost, the climate change is the quintessential collective action problem of our times, right? And so the US emissions could go to zero tomorrow and we still have a significant problem on our hand. And so I think the US-China bilateral relationship that President Obama and President Xi really invested in, 5 or 7 years ago now, was really significant. And Secretary Kerry has certainly carried that forward and ultimately culminated in the Paris Agreement. Obviously, a lot of things have happened just in the past, 7 years since Paris was agreed to. But the fact that we had the two largest emitters, the two largest economies from representing the developed and developing worlds come together under a unified framework for global climate action was huge. And I don't think so. That's reason for optimism. The fact that we've demonstrated that could happen at the global level. I'd also say kind of two related things, and that's really that, climate change is far more, I think Aaron touched on this earlier. It's just in the past decade, it's become, a mainstream political consideration. And I think a big part of that is because you have a youth that is really driven to activism and is frankly pissed off at it, decades of inaction. And you saw that kind of manifest itself for the first time by climate change being one of the 4 pillars of the Biden-Harris presidential campaign. And so to have that issue be alongside sort of, economic recovery, COVID recovery, and addressing historical racial inequality, climate change was the 4th pillar of their campaign. And that speaks volumes in terms of sort of political leadership and momentum behind it. And the final thing I'll just say is that, this isn't like curing Alzheimer's or cancer. We know what the solutions are. And so we have it in our grasp, whether you want to talk about adaptation or mitigation, we have the answers. So to me, there's reason for optimism because we know how to figure this out.
I appreciate that, Dave, and absolutely learning a little bit and getting some optimism from the past endeavors, as you pointed out, with 7 or 8 years ago, but also like understanding that we have the answers in our grasp, and it's just a matter of taking action. Being mindful of time, I just want to thank our panelists, obviously. So thank you, Aaron Goldner. Thank you, Adina Liebman. Thank you, Dave Reedmiller, and your respective organizations for allowing you to come and speak with us today. Senate Appropriations, NOAA, and the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. Also want to thank AGU, and in particular Liz and Greg, for helping share some of the opportunities that AGU engages with in the policy sphere, as well as just like ensuring that all of this could happen. And of course, thank you to the participants. In the last minute or so, I want to also throw it to Julie Vano, who's the current president of the Science and Society section, for quick words and looking ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. This was awesome. Echoing all the thanks that GIF provided, and GIF and Karen, thank you so much for organizing this event. I know we didn't get a chance to get to everything, but I'm going to reach out to our panelists and see if they will provide answers to some of these questions that maybe we can post on our website going forward. There's a lot of different things to be aware of. So there's a continuing conversations that are going to be going on at the fall meeting. I know GIF and Karen are working on a great lineup, so I would encourage you to attend and participate in conversations there. Invite you to participate in all the great things Liz mentioned. Also, check out the Science and Society website, follow us on Twitter, nominate yourself to be a volunteer or nominate a colleague to volunteer to help to engage, to help our section to engage more in this space. And then finally, I would encourage you to attend the 3 remaining Science and Society dialogues, invite your friends and colleagues. We really hope that these can help the science community and the people whose scholarship are in the science policy or in all of the other important fields that help us to connect our science with society. And so encourage you to participate in that. And finally, we do have a participant survey. I just Greg put a bunch of things in the chat that I would recommend following up on, but if you have a chance, filling out the survey, which will help us to think about how we can work for and continue to have these conversations and to continue to work towards action in the space of connecting science and society. So again, thank you. And yeah, hopefully the conversations can continue. Thank you, panelists. That was awesome. I wish we really had